Welcome to the first lesson in Module 2, Assessing Who We Were and Developing a New Vision for Life. In this lesson, you will be able to identify the federal person-centered planning requirements that apply to various Medicaid-funded programs and examine ways to use person-centered practice to support people with brain injury at onset, during rehabilitation, and ongoing. To get to know who they were, you will also begin to understand how open-ended questions and reflective listening techniques can support person-centered discovery. Please note that this training is for providers. However, people who receive supports, their families, and advocates are welcome to view the training. A person-centered planning training and toolkit for people who receive supports and their families is available on the Adults with Brain Injury webpage. In Module 1, we focused on what person-centered thinking, planning, and practice means. We learned how to use two unique person-centered practice tools to identify what is important to and for us, and how to use that information to develop a person profile of those things that matter the most. In this lesson, we are going to build on what you learned about person-centered thinking, planning, and practice, and reflect on how important to and for might be different for people with brain injury at the onset of injury, during rehabilitation, and ongoing. In Lesson 1, we talked about the purpose behind person-centered thinking, planning, and practices. We briefly highlighted federal person-centered planning and practice requirements. Before we apply person-centered planning principles when working with people with brain injury, we should take a moment to pause and look more closely at the regulations associated with person-centered planning, process, and plan development. These apply to various Medicaid-funded programs, and the principles are widely available and applicable. In 42 CFR 441.301, regulations require that the individual, or if applicable, the individual and the individual's authorized representative, actually lead the person-centered planning process. In addition, the person-centered planning process must include the people chosen by the individual, information and support to ensure that they can fully direct the process to the maximum extent possible, and enabled to make those informed choices and decisions. Also must include cultural considerations with information available in plain language and in a manner that is accessible to individuals with disabilities and persons who are limited English proficient. Strategies for solving conflict or disagreement within the process, including clear conflict of interest guidelines for all planning participants as well as providers of services, and informed choices to the individual regarding the services and supports they receive and from whom. The process also must include a method for the individual to request updates to the plan as needed and record the alternative home and community-based settings that were considered by the individual. If we look at the federal requirements more closely, we can begin to bucket the person-centered practices we can use to meet those requirements. The person-centered service plan must reflect the services and supports that are important for the individual to meet the needs identified through an assessment of functional need, as well as what is important to the individual with regard to the preferences for the delivery of such services and supports. We can use person-centered discovery tools to help identify important to and for, as you learned in Module 1. Commensurate with the level of need of an individual and the scope of services and supports available under the state's 1915C HCBS waiver, the written plan must also include some of the provisions noted on this slide. The plan must reflect that the setting in which the individual resides is chosen by the individual. This means that the setting chosen by the individual is integrated in and supports full access of individuals receiving Medicaid HCBS to the greater community, including opportunities to seek employment and work in competitive integrated settings, engage in community life, control personal resources, and receive services in the community to the same degree of access as individuals not receiving Medicaid HCBS. You can use visioning and planning tools to help surface a person's choice in where they live. You can use discovery, planning, and visioning tools to support identification of a person's strengths and preferences. Planning tools can be used to reflect clinical and support needs as identified through an assessment of functional need as well. You can use visioning tools to help a person identify their goals and desired outcomes for their life. Planning tools can also be used to reflect the services and supports, both paid and unpaid, that will assist the individual to achieve identified goals, and the providers of those services and supports, including natural supports. Natural supports are unpaid supports that are provided voluntarily to the individual in lieu of 1915C HCBS waiver services and supports. These same tools can help surface risk factors and measures in place to minimize them, including individualized backup plans and strategies when needed. Finally, you can use monitoring tools to prevent the provision of unnecessary or inappropriate services and supports. When we think about these federal requirements, we can bucket them into practical steps toward person centered planning. You can begin the journey by using discovery tools to begin to think about how to help a person with brain injury to develop a vision for their life. This vision for life will lead to the person centered plan, which we will discuss in more detail in Module 3. As we begin to explore these practical steps, let's take a moment to reflect on this question. Jot down some thoughts on what you think might be different for a person with brain injury during different points in time following an injury. How does what's important for a person change? How does what's important to a person change? Take a moment to pause the video and jot down in your workbook your response to these questions. As you know, the stages of care after a brain injury can be long and winding. The recovery pathway is unique to each individual. The pathway varies based on multiple factors, such as the severity of the brain injury, individual differences like a person's age, their gender, whether they have pre existing health conditions, as well as the type of treatment and rehabilitation that a person needs. There may also be factors related to the cause of the injury, for instance, situations involving trauma or self harm. At times, cognitive, affective, and behavioral symptoms are more disabling than the physical injury. The table on this slide reflects many of the common symptoms that people with brain injury experience along their stages of journey. As more and more people survive moderate to severe brain injury, more studies have explored the relationship between brain injury and mental health. Studies reflect that people with brain injury have higher than normal rates of self harm and suicide. During 2018 and 2019, 121,176 TBI related deaths occurred in the general population in the United States. Of these TBI related deaths, suicide accounted for 35.5%. A prospective cohort study of individuals aged between 18 and 59 years with moderate to severe TBI, which is a sample size of about 1,377, the study found that depression, substance misuse, unemployment, and more severe extracranial injury were implicated as contributing factors to suicidal ideation at 1 year post traumatic brain injury. Experiencing year 1 post traumatic brain injury suicidal ideation was associated with greater likelihood of year 2 suicidal ideation. If you are working with a person along their journey after a brain injury, please pay special attention to these emotional and behavioral symptoms. If you know someone is struggling, don't hesitate to support them to contact the Maine crisis line at 1-888-568-1112 or call 988. People with brain injury navigate different stages of recovery. What's important to and for them will vary by stage. Their goals in life will vary by stage as well. When a person first experiences a brain injury, medical needs override any other needs or preferences they may have. The focus is largely on what's important for the person. Despite this reality, what's important to them still matters just as much as it did before the injury. As the person enters early rehabilitation, focus changes from largely medical to treatment to improve quality of life. Throughout rehabilitation and ongoing, people with brain injury must manage physical symptoms, address cognitive challenges, and develop coping strategies to address emotional and psychological needs. As the person reintegrates into daily life, it becomes more and more important to balance important to and important for. Let's take a moment to hear from Erica, who has taken this brain injury journey. Listen to how Erica experienced person centered planning in the past and how that changed over time.
The way when I was living in the group homes, they would have meetings, and my parents would all come to the meetings. And I was being left out of the meetings. But whereas I had my own guardian, I didn't understand how I could be having a plan made that I wasn't having a say in. They were having a meeting without me because they were having a meeting about me and without me. With having assigned workers come in to work with me, um, we get to go to the YMCA to join in any of those activities, and I get to the grocery store. I get to go out and do my own errands, and they help me with um, housekeeping, chores, food prep, stuff like that. And they're available to help get me to appointments, and they do what they can to make my life more in my control and better for me to work with, having more say. The chiropractic, the physical therapy, my doctor's appointments, counseling, which is done mostly on the phone now, and interacting with others in the community and out in the world. I think we should all be able to communicate in some manner. Accomplishments, reading, writing, drawing. I mean, I recently found, well, here's one drawing of a mermaid. And I have stories in my head and I just have to get them out on paper. I have to tell them fun stories. And if people just assist others that need a little assistance, it's going to get you farther in the long run because it takes a lot to ask for the assistance that you need. It's good to be confident in your connections and be able to open up to the people who are working with you and tell them, like, I would love to go to a museum and look at art some afternoon, you know, something like that. And I want to do what I can for walking, but let's not park in the next town.
As you listened to the video, what did you notice about Erica's journey? How does Erica demonstrate an understanding that her services are designed around what is important for her as well as what is important to her? Take a moment to reflect. Pause the video and use your workbook to record your response. In Module 1, we learned that when we change from system-centered service delivery to person-centered service delivery, we can help people to craft a new vision for their life and act on that vision. As you recall, system-centered service delivery overemphasizes the role of the system, its rules, regulations, policies, and administrators. Person-centered service delivery is designed to find possibility for each person uniquely. It's a focus on quality of life and emphasizes dreams and meaning. Your role is to help a person find that vision, the way they define it, at whatever point along the journey they happen to be experiencing it. To be person centered is to be non judgmental, a good listener, supportive, and have belief in the person. A person with brain injury is more able to navigate the service delivery system along their journey of recovery if you are flexible and can pace expectations. You can begin the journey with them through person centered discovery. There are many ways to use person centered practices to support people with brain injury at onset, during rehabilitation, and ongoing. One of the first steps to applying person centered practices is the element of discovery. This is something we started to discuss in the last module and what you practiced when you explored what's important to and for yourself and developed your own person profile. When we say discovery, we are referring to the questions you ask and the approach you take to get to know a person. Before asking a person any questions you might have, you reflect on how these same questions might apply to your own life. Focus on what isn't helpful and tailor your approach to the person's unique personality, their language, and their culture. In the process of discovery, start with understanding the person's current state. Ask open-ended questions and follow up by repeating what you heard. By following up on what you heard, you can ensure that you understand what the person is saying. More importantly, making sure you understand actually builds trust. The focus at this stage is not on solutions, but rather on getting to know the person. While open-ended questions is always where we want to start, it is okay to adapt if you find that the person may offer up greater information through the use of some well-worded closed questions. So let's practice. Take a moment, pause the video if you need to, and review Samantha and Michelle and think about their best approach. Use your workbook to record your response and thoughts. This is the second page of Samantha and Michelle's conversation. Again, use your workbook and feel free to pause the recording to record your response. Now, on this slide and the following one, read how Michelle talks with the same person. Think about who used the best approach, Samantha or Michelle. Both Samantha and Michelle are kind and are trying to be helpful. Samantha asked more closed questions and offered fewer reflections on what the person shared with her. Both Samantha and Michelle focus on recovery following a stroke, but Michelle directed attention on the person's relationships with his grandchildren and golf buddies, something that's important to the person. The person was more engaged in conversation with Michelle as a result. Michelle also asked more open-ended questions, reflectively listened, and engaged in conversation to evoke change. The biggest difference is the focus on planning versus discovery. Samantha jumped more quickly into solutions and planning next steps, whereas Michelle prioritized discovery. Michelle used interviewing techniques to build a relationship and discover what's important to and for the person. Tips and tools are included in the Person-Centered Practice Library, located at the Adults with Brain Injury webpage. This library contains tools you can use for discovery, such as a person profile to identify opportunities for support through relationships, how the person navigates daily life, the life experience of the person, their personal preferences, as well as their strengths and dreams for the future. Which tips and tools you use will vary based on the person and where they are in their journey. To help a person with brain injury to assess who they were and begin to focus on a new vision for life, we should start first by asking a few key questions, followed by using the person centered tools that best relate to the person. On this slide, you see an example of a person who experienced a brain injury 3 months ago and is now accessing rehabilitation. You could start by using open ended questions. Ask Joe to express his feelings and perspectives. Affirm that, despite the accident, he still has many strengths. To ensure you understand what he is sharing, use reflective listening and summarize what you hear. Questions could include: how may I help you? If you wish, I'd love to hear more about your current concerns. Tell me about a time in the past when you faced a challenge. How did you overcome it? What strengths can you bring forth to help? Maybe we can use a few tools to help find a path to your desired goal. Sometimes open ended questions don't work initially. You may need to ask a few closed ended questions to get the ball rolling. Then you can revert back to open ended questions as you get to know Joe. As you get to know Joe, you can start to identify the different person centered planning tools that may help Joe to find clarity and steps toward his vision. Because people are at different points in their journey and are unique, the tools you might use will vary. We will begin to pinpoint tools you can use when we begin a journey with a person as you expand your relationship with them and help them redefine a future while acknowledging the past. Before we unpack these tools, remember that when working with a person, no matter who they are and what they have experienced, they are people just like you. Resist the urge to fix the person's thoughts and feelings. Take time to understand their motivation. For example, why does Joe want to return to work so quickly? Enter the conversation with empathy, listening and affirming so that you set the stage for empowerment, helping Joe to take charge of his own life. In the next lesson, we will begin to unpack the types of person centered tools you can use when working with people to discover what's important to and for them, and the ways you can use that information to help them find their vision for the future. As we finish up this lesson, think about a time you worked with someone, or maybe it's someone you're working with now. How have you tailored your approach to their unique journey? Take a few moments to jot down your thoughts and use your workbook to record your response. Here are the references used to develop this lesson. Thank you for joining Lesson 1 of Module 2.